today's theme is going to be reading comprehension. We're going to look at a couple different types of reading comp questions since it has actually been a while since we did a free prep hour on a verbal topic. Definitely free jump in with questions at any point as we go through. I'm going to be asking you guys to do a lot of stuff as we go through class. And then if we have a little time at the end, we might do a more open question and answer session. Is anyone here new to the GRE? Like you're just starting to study, just thinking about it? Yay, Joanne is. Cool. Welcome. Tanner is. Awesome. Oh yeah, lots of people. Great. You guys have lots of company. Cool. So we will cover all of the basics that you need to get into a couple different question types. So if you're new, don't worry. And if you've been studying for a while, I think there's still going to be some cool stuff to learn too. All of the problems that we do tonight are going to come from this book, the 5-pound book. It actually has a new cover. The new cover is white and black and red, not green. And this is a great resource because it is literally 5 pounds. It's enormous, and it has tons of practice problems divided up by topics. So you can say, like, I want to do, 30 problems on rates because that's a weakness for me, and go and there's a whole chapter with 30 problems on rates. So the reading questions and passages we look at today are all drawn from here. What we're going to do today, since we have some folks who are new, and then also as a refresher for folks who aren't, we're going to look just what can you expect from reading comp on the GRE, what are the different types of tasks, and then we're going to dive into 2 specific question types, detail and inference. And those are the questions that ask us about specific parts of the passages. They're also the questions that tend to be a little bit trickier for many people. I see many of my students having a lot of trouble with these at all levels and sort of at all points in their preparation. So I thought it would be a fun thing for us to chat about. Okay, so let's talk about reading comp on the GRE. There are 2 big types of reading comp that you're going to see. So you're going to see things that ask about the content of passages, and those are probably the most common types of questions. So you're also going to see a few questions that ask about logic. Has anyone here done GMAT? Is anyone coming over from studying for GMAT? Okay, cool. Yeah, so Elizabeth, the logic questions on the GRE, what we call logic-based reading in GRE, very similar to critical reasoning on GMAT, very similar to parts of the LSAT, if anyone's looked at that as well. So content-based questions, they ask us, what is the passage saying? What is the author's opinion? How is it structured? Sort of about the substance of the passage. Logic questions are pretty different. They ask very specifically about how an author is reasoning or putting together an argument. For content questions, we're going to see 3 types. We're going to see main idea, detail, and inference. We're not going to talk a lot about main idea today, though I did, if you go back in our YouTube channel archive, I think I did teach a prep hour last summer on that type. But these are the questions that ask about the passage as a whole. Detail and inference questions ask about specific parts of passages. So that's why we're going to talk about those 2 types together, because they're asking about the same kind of thing. For logic questions, you're going to see a bunch of different types. There's lots of little types of those. We're not going to talk about those today, but my colleague Kaylee did teach something on those too that you can probably also find on our YouTube channel. So if you're curious about those, you can go back and dig through that archive and find what she did. She did some pretty cool stuff with those. Reading comp is about half of verbal. That's another useful thing to keep in mind. 10 out of 20 questions in each verbal section are going to be reading comp. Okay, so let's dive right in and let's talk about detail questions. Questions that are going to ask us about something specific in the passage. So a detail question is going to include some language in the question stem that reminds you that you're honing in on a specific part of the passage. So they'll say things like, according to the passage, or the author mentions. They might sometimes even highlight a detail in the passage so you know exactly where to look. Sometimes they might ask you to select a sentence in the passage and highlight that. But anytime you have a question that's pointing you back to a specific part of the passage using this type of language, you know you're dealing with a detail question. And it's useful to know what type of question you're dealing with, because that's going to help you decide what process to use, how to approach answering that question. It's also going to tell you what kinds of traps to watch out for in the answers. So how do we approach these? Well, the first thing is when you see a detail question, when you see one of these questions that's asking you about a specific part of the passage, you're going to go back to the passage and reread that specific part. So you may have read the passage as a whole to start, but you're still going to go back after you see a detailed question. You never want to put yourself in the position of having sort of read through the passage once and then trying to answer these from memory, because they often are very subtle and sort of focus on very particular things. So you can get into trouble if you try to do it from memory. When I see one of these questions, the first thing I do is I just read the question stem. So I read only the question. I save the answer choices for later. This is one of the biggest things that I think people intuitively do when they start with the GRE. Well, they get a verbal question, they read the question, and they jump right into the answers. Because like, we want to answer the question and be fast, and the clock is ticking down. But actually, when we do that, when we jump into the answer choices too soon, it's really, really easy to get confused, to fall into a trap. So if there's one thing that you take away from today, it's that when you're dealing with verbal, you want to hold off on going into the answer choices themselves until you have a good sense of what you're looking for. So I just read that question and I figure out what is that question asking? Like, what sort of topic is it about? You know, are there sort of specific keywords or terms that tell me where to look in the passage? But I have a really clear idea of what is this question asking me to do? Like, I might even paraphrase it in my head so I'm really clear. Then I go back to the passage, I find the part of the passage that deals with those keywords, with that topic, and I read it and I understand it. And this is definitely where I want to like read closely and understand it fully. So I'm very clear on what's being said. And then I can come up with some kind of prediction for what am I looking for when I go into my answer choices. So by the time I get to my answer choices, I should have a pretty clear idea of what I think the right answer might deal with. Doesn't work 100% of the time, but a lot of the time that's going to be what you want to do. After I've done that, then I start going through my answer choices. For me, I don't write down a ton in verbal, but what I do always write down is A, B, C, D, E. I write down the answer choices on my paper, and then I can cross them off after I read each one and make a decision on it. So that way, I'm slowing myself down, I'm not rushing, and I'm making sure to consider each answer choice fully and not make sort of snap judgments, which can often get us into trouble. I want to make sure when I'm dealing with an inference question that the right answer should be 100% true according to the passage. So I'm looking for something, not that might be true or that's sort of close to what the passage says, but I'm looking for something that I can feel totally confident is true after having read the passage. I think we should try one. That was a lot of me talking. I imagine a lot of this is going to feel clear when we look at a question. Any questions before we do jump into solving some problems? All right. So I'm going to give you a passage, and I'm going to give you just the question. So what I want you to do, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I want you to read this question, go back through the passage, and think about what would you predict the answer to this question might look like, or what is the answer to this question going to be? So here's the passage. And we see right away, according to the passage, so we know we're dealing with a detailed question, the reason that many college graduates are choosing to launch their own companies in the present climate is that. All right, you guys have 2 minutes, go through the passage, think about what is the answer to this question going to be, or what might it have to do with. All right. Everyone go ahead in the chat. Tell us, what do you think the answer to this question is going to be? Or how would you answer this question if it were like a type your own answer question, just based on the passage? No better option in recession times? Yeah. Not able to find jobs, don't have better alternatives, finding traditional job. Yeah. As someone who graduated from college in 2008, I'm very sympathetic to this passage. My life and the life of many friends. Yeah, cool. And college, unable to find traditional jobs. I like that, Andrea. You are, and I'm sorry if your name is actually pronounced Andrea. I have a good friend named Andrea. So I always want to pronounce that way. Yeah. We have this, instead opt to start their own businesses. Would-be entrepreneurs have little to lose. Cool. So we know going into the answers, we're looking for something about like they don't have other options, something like that. So I'm going to show you the answers now. And when you are confident you know what the right answer is, go ahead and chat that. Chorus of B. Yeah, nice. Awesome. You guys are all in agreement and you are 100% correct. Cool. So one thing to notice here is that we took a little bit of time up front on sort of unpacking the question, looking at the passage, making a prediction, but then we were able to be really fast on the answer choices. And I think that's a good thing to remind yourself of, that if you take your time on the sort of understanding, unpacking, question stem passage part of this process, you'll be able to make fast decisions about the answer choices. And ultimately, you'll be more accurate and also more efficient. How much of the passage did we really have to read to answer this question? Did we have to read the whole thing? Did we have to, yeah, Bailey says like first quarter, first 6 sentences, yeah. Yeah, we really didn't have to read the whole thing. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as you start working on reading comprehension, is that this is sort of a shorter, not quite as awful passage, but you're going to see things that are long and you're going to see things that are really dense and you're going to see things that are kind of boring. That's okay, because you're not going to have to understand and read every single word in order to answer the questions correctly. And it's just a good thing to have in the back of your mind as you work with these. Like, oh, if you get a passage that you find super confusing, don't panic. You can still do a lot with just a little bit of text. That went really well, so I think we should do a harder one and see how that goes. Here's a harder one. According to the passage, which of the following characterizes short stories by Isabel Allende and short stories by Sandra Cisneros? How did that time feel? Do you guys want the same amount of time? Do you want more time? Do you want less time? First few people to jump in with a strong opinion. Cool. I think Sam's taking the day, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes again. Unpack this question. Be ready at the end of those 2 minutes to give us your prediction for what the answer is going to be. All right, that was 2 minutes. So you guys know the drill. In the chat, tell us, what do you think the answer to this question might look like? What's true of both of these authors' stories? And if you're having trouble with that, you could also tell me what is not the same about these. You know, sometimes thinking about what do we know the right answer won't look like. Yeah, this one's a little trickier. And I think that's why we're seeing a little bit more variation. Yeah, cool. So maybe let's make a list of some differences. What do we know that's different? I know Allende has same settings, but Cisneros has different settings. So that's something that's different between them. We have those different settings. Yeah, yeah. Clarice has put it nicely too. Like where Isabel Allende has sort of more consistency, like she's setting all her stories in the same town. But with Sandra Cisneros, we're getting like different characters, different settings. There's a lot of change between them. There's even like a lot of different, each character presents a distinct style. Like there's a lot of changes. And then I think a lot of people were pointing us to this last sentence. What these works have in common is more intuitive. Mood, circumstance, time, tone, and imagery all play a role in creating the world in which the stories take place. What is that last sentence saying? Because that last sentence seems like it's saying something kind of important about what these stories have in common. Everyone in the chat, try, if you were going to rewrite this story in a really simple way, like rewrite it for like a 6-year-old, how would you rewrite this sentence? What do these two authors have in common? Similar point in time, same feelings. I'm gonna push back a little bit on both of those, because one of the things that's important with detailed questions is to be really precise. So do we know that these authors use the same time and the same imagery and the same mood? Like, is this sentence saying that the mood and images and time are the same in both books? Yeah, it's not saying that they're saying, yeah, Bailey, I think that's getting closer to what's going on. Like they're saying that they, yeah, play a role, Anna, I think is a really important phrase to pull out. I like that. They're saying that they're using all of these different things to create a world. So they're using sort of a similar technique to create a world, but it's not that they're using the exact same times and settings. All right, I think we've unpacked this passage enough. Let's take a look at the answers. Here you go. Consider, chat when you have one you think you like. Yeah, we're getting E. Okay. Diana, you had a question mark. Was there another answer choice you were kind of hesitating on, or is there something about E that makes you uncomfortable? Cool. So the good news is E is right. So Diana, one of your things to do might be just to build confidence. That's actually for everyone a really important thing. It's important to learn how to get things right, but it's also important to convince yourself that you know what you're doing and you're good and you have a plan and you're not going to second guess yourself. So maybe it's just reminding yourself like, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm right. Grace, I'm so glad you pointed out A, because I think A is a really interesting trap answer here. I think it totally makes sense to me why maybe, my guess is probably a few people were drawn to A, and it totally makes sense why. So my first question is, why is A tempting? Like, what's appealing about A? It's not the right answer, but you can make an interesting case for it. So what's appealing about A? Like, why were you drawn to A? Why might someone be drawn to A? Yeah, it says like what these works have in common is more intuitive, and it mentions tone. So like tone is in there for sure. So why is A not our right answer? Like I just told you guys E is right. A lot of people like D. Why? And I see though that this last sentence says like, oh, it's about similarities and it mentions tone. So why is A not right? Oh, interesting. So Ronnie and Nico, that's an interesting way to think of it. Like, oh, if I'm going to pick A, like I would also have to pick B because time is also on that list. So, I know there has to be one right answer. Yeah, guys, that's a really smart way to think about this. Like we know there has to be one right answer. There has to be one best choice. And like if I can't tell the difference between two, then I probably neither of them's right. Yeah. So I like that. But I think there's more to be said. Does anyone have other thoughts about why A and B are both wrong? Yeah, yep, Tanner, that's a really, really nice way to articulate that. Yeah. So coming back, we want to be really, really clear on what this sentence is saying. Like with these detailed questions, and especially when we get into inference questions in a moment, you really want to watch out for sort of doing this thing that we all tend to do. We're like, oh, I saw that in the passage. Like that looks like some words I saw. Like, yeah, that's in there. Because the GRE knows that we like to do that, especially when we're stressed and anxious. It's so easy to fall into that habit. And the GRE knows that. People who make the GRE know that. So they make these traps for us that are designed to catch us when we're not totally processing what the passage is saying, and we're just going for familiar language. So this last sentence, kind of coming back, what is it saying? It's saying what these works have in common is more intuitive. And then coming back to the phrase, someone called it out. I forget exactly who, but someone called out this all play a role in creating the world. So what is this sentence saying? Well, it's saying all of these things, mood, circumstance, time, tone, and imagery, play a role in creating the world. So that's what the authors have in common. They're making worlds and they're getting us to believe in these worlds by using these different things in this list. But what the sentence isn't saying is that they have the same tone or they have the same time. It's saying they're using tone and time to accomplish an effect. But it's not saying that tone and time are the same within the stories of both authors. So this is what makes this a harder question. It's getting a little bit more subtle, a little bit trickier than our last one. I really like the way people thought about it, saying like, okay, if I have both tone and time, these probably aren't right. I'm going to go with E. Lots of people getting to the right answer. But it's a good moment, I think, to remind ourselves, like when we're dealing with detailed questions, when we're dealing with inference questions, we really want to make sure we totally understand what the passage is saying, that we're very clear on that, that we're not just sort of making quick connections. We're going to transition now, and we're going to talk about inference questions, which are very similar to detailed questions. They pair well together. That's why we're doing both today. But before we do, I'd like everyone to chat. What's one thing to remember about detailed questions? When you see one of these questions that says something like according to the passage, points us back to a specific part of the text, what are you going to keep in mind when you see these questions? Everyone chat something in. Let's see if we learned anything cool. Yeah, Bailey, great. 100% right. Like we want to, yep, 100% true. Every word. A lot of times you get answers that are very close, but there's one or two words wrong. Yeah, find the proof. Nice. Predict first. Awesome. Yeah. Start question first. Understand what the passage is, or understand what that specific part of the passage is saying for sure. Awesome. As you study, this is a great thing to do. You know, solve a question, understand it, then pause and say like, okay, what's something I've learned from this question? Because you're never going to see that question on the official test. You know, you're not going to see it again, that exact same question, but you'll probably see a similar pattern or kind of trap or thing. So taking the time to do this, to reflect, to pull takeaways out of questions is going to enormously help you in terms of your facility with this test and your score improving faster. Okay, now let's talk about a very similar type of question. I'm going to talk about inference questions. So inference questions are very similar to detail questions in that we are looking for an answer choice that is 100% true based on the passage. So exact same focus. But these are often trickier because the answers to inference questions, it's not going to be stated as directly. So the right answer to an inference question will be 100% true. But at first glance, it might not look that way. It's going to be a little bit trickier to figure out sort of how the right answer and the passage are connected. These use language like infer and suggest that seems kind of wishy-washy and like we should bring in outside information, but we shouldn't do that. When I see words like infer and suggest on the GRE, I immediately rephrase them as like, according to the passage, I can prove this. Like, I can show this is true using the passage. Or another way to state what the passage is saying is this. Like, I reground myself in language that's more literal so that I'm not tempted to sort of infer in the way that we often infer in our daily lives. So we're going to approach these exact same way that we approach our detail questions. We're going to read just the question stem. We're going to find the proof. We're going to really understand what it says. And then we're going to get into our answer choices. However, before we do some actual questions, I want to just do a couple exercises to illustrate this idea that the right answer to an inference question is going to look a little further away from the passage than what we'd expect in the right answer to a detail question. So I'm going to give you guys a simple statement and 5 answer choices, and I just want you to tell me which of these answer choices is something that I could infer from this statement. So here we go. My statement is, my puppy is always staring at me. What could be inferred from this statement? Yeah, awesome. Cool. Strong consensus on E. Nice. And this is exactly what I would expect in a GRE inference question. The right answer doesn't look exactly like what the statement says, but it's something that I know has to be true. Like right now is part of always, so it has to be true. A, B, C, and D, I think, are examples of how, to varying degrees, some are kind of silly, how we use infer in real life. Like, oh, in real life, we say infer when we mean like, I could sort of reasonably guess or assume that might be true. But when the GRE uses infer, they really mean prove. Let's try one more exercise, I think slightly trickier, slightly less goofy. Pay more shoes cost $76. Joe has enough money to buy the shoes. Which of these statements could I infer? Yeah, this one's a little trickier. We're kind of split between A and B. So let's talk about that. If I tell you that Joe has enough money to buy shoes that cost $76, are you 100% sure that he has $80? Like, would you bet a month's rent? Yeah, right? So if your answer to that sort of, would you bet your rent on this? If your answer to that is no, it is probably not the right answer to an inference question. Joe definitely could have $80, Yeah, Nico, it happens. It's true. They get particularly in logic questions, but sometimes I can't spell either, so it's fine. I never write the word necessary in classes because I can't remember how many C's and S's there are. Yeah, so he could have $80, but he could have 81, he could have 76, he could have 77. I don't know that for sure. What about answer choice B? Would you bet a month's rent that if he can buy these shoes, he has at least $1? Yeah. Like if he has 76, he definitely has at least one. Why is B, like why is A attractive though? Or like why is it hard to spot B as the correct answer right away? Because this is a trick. Like this is a trap here. This question is designed to trap people. Why is it that maybe at first glance we want to rule out B? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Like 80, 76, they look really similar. $1 looks at first glance like really far away from our statement. And this is like a classic example of how a passage and the right answer to an inference trap relate. At first, if you're just glancing at it really quickly, superficially, you might think, oh, no, that's really different. That's weird. But you need to then like take a little bit of time to process what is the passage saying, what is the answer choice saying, can I prove it? So these take a little bit more processing time to be certain, and you don't want to rule things out too quickly just because they look different. Yeah, yep, I think that's totally true. You're like, oh, $1, so far away. But then when you think about it, you're like, oh no, yeah, that's the one that I can prove. Okay. So let's come back to the first passage we did about the recession. I should not have chosen this passage. It's just making me feel gloomy. But it's okay. 2008 was a long time ago. Let's come back to this passage and let's try an inference question related to it. So it can be inferred from the passage that over the course of the recent recession, the number of American high-value businesses founded per year did what? You guys know the drill. Since we've already looked at this passage before, I'll give you maybe a minute and a half or so to consider the answer and then be ready to chat in your prediction. I put the answer choices up too soon, Nico. So apparently not only can I not spell the word necessary, but I can't click buttons properly. Yeah, yep. So yes, I would like you now to predict what, and your perspective may have been skewed a little bit by my surprise reveal of the answer choices. But what do we know about, oh, goodness. Sorry, guys. I'm teaching on a new computer, and I clearly have not entirely learned how to use it. Oh, gee. Yeah, what has declined? Let's be precise about that. What has declined? Yeah, I think the proportion. Cool. So we know the proportion of high value businesses has declined. Yeah. We also know that the number of new businesses has been higher. So do we know anything about the actual number of high value businesses? No. Yep, we know the proportion has declined, but when it comes to number, we don't know for sure. So unfortunately, here's another intersection of quant and verbal. A proportion, something like a ratio or a fraction or a percent, doesn't tell us anything about absolute amount. That's the trick that shows up in quant, shows up in verbal. All right, so we've read the question. We're very clear on what the passage is saying. Now let's go to our answer choices. Yeah, yep. Nice. Yeah, don't know anything about actual numbers, so we have to choose E. Let's imagine that we missed that, right? Like we missed that proportion when we were going back to the passage. How could we still get to the right answer? Like, what do you guys notice about the other 4 answers that might be helpful? Yeah, there's some strong similarities between them. Yeah. Yeah, and we notice we have like sharply and moderately for both, and really good point, like we don't know. Even if we were assuming sort of wrongly that the number had declined, like even if we misinterpreted the passage that way, we definitely can't say anything about how quickly or not quickly the decline is happening. Yep. So sometimes we can also rely on process of elimination to kind of bail us out of being imprecise. Or if we just get something that's really hard and we're stuck and we're confused, focusing on eliminating wrong answers can help us often as much as sort of honing in on what the right answer is. All right. That went well, so let's now go ahead to our slightly harder passage. So here is a question. The author of the passage would be most likely to agree with which of the following statements? Is there anything about the wording of this question that seems worth discussing? It's unusual or tricky. Let's just focus on the question itself for a moment. Yeah. How do we know? Like, we know we're in the land of detail and inference, so we know that we are looking for something we can prove. How do we know what the author would agree with? Like, what is that really asking us? Like, how can I get inside this author's mind and know what they would agree with? Yeah, Stefani. Yep. Yeah. Something the author agrees with is going to be something the author says. So when I see this language most likely to agree with, yeah, exactly, Elizabeth. Like, what is this author's point? They're going to agree with something that's very similar to that. Yeah. Yep, Tanner, that's also a great point. A lot of the authors and passages, for the most of the passages and authors actually, don't have really strong stances or opinions. So we often can rule things out if they're very strongly opinionated or strongly worded. That's a really good point about these questions as well. Based on this question, are we going to be able to really predict an answer here? Yeah, that was a super leading question, but thank you for answering it anyway. Yeah, we can't. This question's really bland. So for a lot of verbal, yes, like your go-to approach is like, don't get into the answer choices too soon. However, sometimes you get a really bland question stem like this. There's not a lot you can do with it, and then you're going to have to go into the answers and sort of think about them one by one and evaluate each answer and rule it out. So I'm going to give you guys a minute and a half to do that. Don't chat your answer in yet. Just take your time, think about it, and then After a minute and a half has passed, I'll have you guys all chat in what you think is right. All right, go ahead and chat in your answers. And as you do, I got a really good question in the Q&A, and I want to talk about it a little bit. So the question was, how do I know when I can pick multiple answers and when I just have to pick one? We're actually going to talk about that next. We're going to look at a select all question, but you can spot them right away because they'll have square boxes next to the answer choices. And it'll say, indicate all that apply. For reading, when you have a select all question, there will only be 3 answers. So if you see 5 A, B, C, D, E answers like this in a reading comp question, then you know it's a pick one kind of situation. And we're gonna hopefully talk a little bit about those select all questions before we go in reading. So really good question. True and quant as well. Those square boxes also indicate select all. Okay. Let's go through and talk about each of these. People really like B. But we've gotten some A, some C, some E. We have a lot of different answers, and this is a tricky one, so I'm not surprised. And I like it because I think we're actually mostly wrong, and that's cool because it means we're all going to learn something fun from this. My favorite questions to the teacher, the ones everyone gets wrong, because then everybody learns something, because we learn the best things from mistakes. Okay. So let's talk about each answer choice and let's think about what's wrong with it. Let's think about like what we can rule out right away. So let's talk about A. Short story collections depend on the reader to find the common thread that ties the stories together. What's wrong with A? Or if you liked A, where's the proof for A? How do we either prove that A is true or convince ourselves that it's not? So I definitely agree. We're talking about a single short story can suggest a desired response from the reader. So we're definitely saying that like short stories kind of get, you know, try to get people to think or feel something. Yeah, they're saying like, oh, we're trying to evoke a feeling or we're suggesting a desired response. But then look at the language. So that says suggest. I do also have down here, people cited this, much of the burden is placed on the reader. So that's even a little bit stronger. Yeah. Yep. But a good point, Elizabeth, that's only specific to Cisneros. And this is making a general statement about short story collections. and it's saying they depend on the reader. So in the passage, I have some kind of wishy-washy language about readers, and I have a very specific statement about Sandra Cisneros' readers. But then what's different in this answer choice compared to what I get in the passage? Thinking about the language of this answer choice. When I think about like suggests a desired response, or much of the burden in Cisneros is placed on the reader. I think we're still talking about collections of short stories. There is a little bit too much emphasis on the reader. That's part of it. What else? There's something else that's happening here that's important. Yeah, what is it about depend that we should kind of be wary of? It's a good point, Rachana. Yeah, and Bailey, I don't think I did credit to your comment. Like, you're totally right to call out that that first sentence is talking about a single short story and this answer is talking about a collection. Like, I don't think I sort of processed that correctly, but yeah, I think that's a good point too. Yeah, depend, yeah. Brigitte, I think that's a good way to put it. Elizabeth, that's a good way to put it. Like, depend is really strong, and it's a really certain statement. It's really hard to be 100% about extreme statements. So a lot of wrong answers in inference questions will be similar to stuff that does show up in the passage, but they'll push it too far. So they'll say, like, the passage will say, like, this can do this, and maybe the reader's involved, or much of the burden in this one author is placed on the reader. And then the sort of trap answer will draw a big generalization from that and use really strong language like depend. What other answer choice here makes a pretty strong statement that's going to be hard to prove? Like, what other answer choice could we rule out for a similar reason? Yeah, Nico, what's wrong with B? B was very popular, but I'd agree with you. Yeah, I'd agree with you too, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth called out the word the best in answer choice E. Definitely a big warning sign. If I see better, best, worst, things like that, that's really extreme. I can roll that out. Nice. And yeah, I like the way people are looking at answer choice B now too. That's all. Rajana, Anna, yeah, yep. The majority of her fiction. So we definitely hear some stuff about one collection that Sandra Cisneros wrote, but we don't know that that's the majority of her work. We just know it's one book. So very similar to A, right? It's the passage is saying something about one sort of case, and then the wrong answer is going to extrapolate that to everything. So we can also get rid of B. And then nobody liked D, which I think, you know, we do have intuition here. What's common is more intuitive, but that's about both books. That's sort of a bigger idea. It's not saying that intuition is more important. That's a similar kind of trap. So we can get rid of D. And we're left with C. People didn't really like C. Not a lot of people chose C. Yeah, Ronnie, more important. Totally agree. Why didn't you like C? Why is it easy to kind of skip over or sort of wrongly eliminate C or not give it its due? Yeah. Anna, I actually like possible because it's not certain, you know, like depend or best or majority, like very definitive. But possible is kind of giving us a little bit of wiggle room, and I actually really like that there. I'd agree with Chana. Like, I think it's hard to sort of prove C is right. We'll do it. But I think once you get more familiar with these inference questions, it then becomes easier to spot like, oh, A, B, D, and E are sort of setting this classic type of trap. I can rule them out. So even if I don't feel great about proving C, I can really clearly disprove the others. Process of elimination gets really helpful as inference questions get harder. Why is C right though? Like, how would you prove C? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point too, Clarice. Like most likely also kind of gives us some hedging, and then we get like some hedging impossible. Yeah, Tanner's also has a good point. Like disproving C is hard. So like remember, if you're going to rule something out, be able to like say like it's definitely wrong for this reason. Beware of ruling things out because you're just like, I don't know if I saw that. If that's your feeling, like leave it in and see what else is in the other answer choices. Does anyone have a good case for C? I think it's subtle, but I think it's, you know, we get a little bit up here, like it's difficult to sort of create a consistent flow within a story collection. And then we get Sandra Cisneros, yeah, who sort of is very different, but she still relates her stories to one another. You know, like she's using different characters, different settings, but she's still kind of linking the stories. So there is proof for C in the passage, but it's a lot sort of more spread out and oblique than what we'd see with some of the detail or easier inference questions we've seen, which makes this a tricky question. So as they get harder, think a lot about eliminating wrongs. That's going to get you really far. Okay, we have not that much time left, unfortunately. I'm just going to say one quick thing about a select all question because it came up. And the quick thing I'm going to say, we're not going to sort of do a whole select all question, but this is what it would look like. You know, you get the 3 answers in the select all and the square boxes next to the answers. When I see a select all question like this, I treat it like 3 separate true-false questions. So this is another case where I can't predict an answer, and I'm just going to go through each of these answers and decide true or false. Don't have time to work through this one, unfortunately, but because I got a question about it, I just wanted to show an example. What I would like you to do, same drill that we did for inference, everyone chat in what is something about detail questions that you want to remember, take out into your studying in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, go back to the passage, find the proof. Super important, yep. 100% true. Yeah, that's a good point too, looking for extreme language. Like you can do a lot, particularly if you're stuck between 2 answers, thinking about what's more extreme. Yeah, that's mentally rewriting questions is really helpful as well. And then being really precise in wording, making sure every word in an answer choice is 100% true is really important. Yeah, Tanner, it's a really good question. I would say 2 question types that are slower tend to be except, like all of the following are true except questions, and select all. So if I'm thinking about like I need to make up time, I need to skip something, those are the question types that I would be more likely to sort of guess and skip on efficiently. Yep. Yeah, great point too, Clarice. Not quickly just choosing based on similar words. That's a really good trap to watch out for too. Okay. Yeah. Thank you all for coming tonight. You can sit in on the first session of any of our classes, online or in person. If you want, you know, it's 3 hours. There's a lot more if you just want to go sit in on one class. If you want to take a full course, you can check it out. Either way, check that out. There's a lot of these free prep hours recorded on our YouTube channel too, if you want to look at some other topics, some other teachers as well. Thanks for being here, and I hope you guys have a great Sunday night and a good start to your week tomorrow. Good luck as you study.